Yanze Khenpo Sodargye Doner Molam Khenpo Ngakya Bangar Dangon Zanto Shirmurdo Tumba Dikji Janla Gi Shamsar Nachar Zergi Jagamsa Jawar Tiki Jano Yila Jimmy Benzo Zhang Lang Sorande Gurti Toban Pora Shinjilo.
Profound and subtle Dharma is rarely encountered in eons. Now we hear and follow it. May we realize the Tathagata's meaning. To liberate beings, please generate bodhicitta before teaching.
There's one more lesson left for the Sigalovada Sutra.
Essentially, we have now almost finished covering the introductory material. Now, within this Sigalovada Sutra, the central teaching revolves around what is known as the 6 directions. And concerning these 6 directions, we have previously discussed the relationships involving parents, our teachers, and couples. The 3 objects of veneration in those directions have already been discussed. So, for our discussion today, we will begin by talking about the topics of relatives, friends, and companions. Following that, we will move on to examine the relationship between masters and their dependents. For today, the very first topic we'll cover, the first relationship, will be on the subject of relatives and kin. It is important to note that in our translation, this concept is referred to as kin. It is significant that in the translations by the figures Anshigao and Senkyetipo, they both make reference to the concepts of relatives, kin, and friends. If we talk about kin here, it's possible the term is being used in a more restricted sense, referring exclusively to those relatives who are directly connected to us by a shared bloodline. Now, as for the term relatives here, the ancient text of the Vinaya Sutra often says that kinship within the boundary of 7 generations is what is formally referred to as kin. If we're talking about friends and relatives, then this group includes not only your own relatives, but also your friends, but also those truly wonderful friends who are indeed closely connected to you. For your information, they are included as well. We can certainly understand this matter from both of the given perspectives. As for the original Pali text, I have not yet been able to find the exact details, but I personally believe that there are a number of different versions of the Buddhist scriptures. It's important to remember that if there are different versions available, the content they express might not be precisely the same. In that case, we will be discussing this in detail below. According to this specific scripture, the Buddha told, and it should be noted this is the northern direction, the Buddha then told the householder Shansheng that if someone, having been born as a human being, in one's conduct towards their own relatives and kin, it is taught that individuals should consistently approach and show profound respect for their family members in 5 distinct and important ways. Consequently, when it comes to one's own relatives, in life there is often such a requirement. This is true for our relationships with close friends and relatives, as well as the professional dynamics between superiors and their subordinates. It should be said that in our current society, these are also very important. Perhaps everyone present here is well aware. It's certainly true that in the past many things might have been successfully accomplished individually. But in our current era, it should be said that we truly need to cultivate a strong kind of team spirit. This is true whether in the East or the West, as any significant matter in this world requires it. It is ultimately accomplished through strong teamwork. This includes within Buddhism as well, where many important things are also accomplished by teams working together. Of course, the highest form of team in the Buddhist tradition is actually the spiritual community known as the Sangha. For us, this Sangha should be relatively easy. In all the Vinaya scriptures, the Buddha explained in truly great and meticulous detail the complete management and operational model of the monastic community of the Sangha. So, for this reason, we often say it's fascinating to consider that among all the organizational structures in the world, one of the earliest forms of team management can actually be found within Buddhism. Furthermore, the monastic community itself, which is a perfect example that embodies these principles, is known by the name Gendunba. And the term Gendunba essentially refers to a harmonious assembly, a group that lives together in harmony. We often talk about what is known as the 6 harmonies. As for the 6 harmonies, the first is physical harmony, living together. Our Sangha often lives together. Then there is harmony in speech, since we live together, but there is no quarreling. There are not many arguments among us. Next is harmony and intention, having shared aspirations, having common goals in this life, and truly shared aspirations for future lives as well. In addition to that, there is a sense of harmony and discipline. Everyone upholds the same precepts. Whether it's the lay precepts, monastic precepts, or bodhisattva precepts, we all share the same discipline. Additionally, there is also harmony in our views. Our views start from the belief that cause and effect never fail, or, for example, faith in being reborn in pure lands, as well as the understanding of how rare it is to obtain a human body and so on, including the view of emptiness and the view of benefiting sentient beings. Our views are very much aligned. This alignment has two aspects. One is a harmony in our views, and the other is a harmony in our benefits. This means we have shared interests, which gives us common goals to accomplish together. For example, reciting sutras, studying, contemplating, and practicing, liberating sentient beings, and so on and so forth. There are indeed many shared benefits. In this way, from the perspective of the meaning of the six harmonies, we should strive to be a harmonious team. Moreover, such a harmonious team is also extremely important for each and every person in the world today. The importance of teamwork is widely recognized. In today's world, many believe that effective teams are essential for success. So, if a team is to be built or to function properly, understanding the core principles is vital. It must rely on individuals. What does it rely on individuals for? First of all, we must be good at communication. If you don't communicate in an open and effective way, then it is highly likely that certain difficulties will arise between people. There may be certain difficulties in this regard. Therefore, it is essential that there is clear communication through a shared language. Following that, there should be a smooth and continuous flow of information. This applies whether we are discussing our core values, our long-term vision, or our shared mission, or our goals, and so on. It is essential that there should be a very smooth and fluid exchange of ideas and information. If this is lacking, then it will be very difficult for us to be harmonious or to cooperate. We also really need to respect each other, because in this world, of course, people come in all sorts of different kinds of varieties. Everyone has their own characteristics, hobbies, personalities, and habits. This uniqueness is reflected in physical appearances and even everyone's personal tastes, so it's natural their interests are different as well. So you need to learn to respect others. If you are unable to respect others, then meaningful cooperation becomes nearly impossible. We need to have effective methods for solving problems. So, what kind of solutions should we be looking for? When there are many people, there are bound to be disputes. In fact, with some disputes, you might even find yourself personally involved. Some of these you may not be directly involved in, but in your daily life you'll find that all kinds of things like this frequently happen. When conflicts arise, you need to be good at reconciliation. How do you reconcile? And finally, no matter what the situation is, you will need to have a kind of courage. If you find yourself lacking courage, whether it's our initial communication or ultimately solving problems, there will be no courage. What are people like nowadays? They don't dare to face others. Even some of us who practice cultivation, if we just shut ourselves in our own rooms, holding a prayer wheel and chanting Om Mani Padme Hum, in that case they might still feel capable. But as soon as they go out and see someone, whether it's about cooperating or communicating with other people, or even if someone were to directly criticize your actions or opinions, they completely collapse. They just can't handle it from a psychological standpoint. They have what is in essence a fragile heart to begin with, and at the slightest setback, they just suddenly snap and simply can't take it anymore. In just 2 or 3 days, they can't even get out of bed. They feel heartbroken, hopeless, and in pain. In the end, they see the whole world as having turned gray and gloomy. It's as if they're about to pass away into nirvana, because a person's mindset is very important. When your own mindset has problems, it feels as if the entire world around you begins to lose all of its color. And when you reach that point, any kind of cooperation or harmony with the people around you becomes impossible to talk about. So in our current era, it's true that if we want to study Buddhism, then within our Buddhist community, everyone should also have the courage to face things head on. There will definitely be some incidents, some conflicts, but there's really nothing to be afraid of. We should still, some of us are especially afraid of offending others, and particularly scared of interacting with people. especially those who in the past had little life or work experience and never really dealt with society, who just started out in school or even in the womb and felt that the world was very beautiful and gentle. But as soon as you start interacting with all kinds of different people in this world, you realize, oh, it's not at all like you imagined. It turns out that people's hearts are so complicated, so troublesome, at this point, let alone liberating sentient beings. Even just eating together or continuing to work together with everyone, continuing to generate aspiration, continuing to benefit sentient beings, even this kind of mindset becomes impossible. This community of practitioners is what we call the Sangha in Buddhism. The Sangha should have a genuine spirit of cooperation. I think that in this day and age, it is more important than ever for us as Buddhists to embody this. If everyone in different places has a sense of teamwork, then you'll find things become much easier to accomplish. A single chopstick, as you know, breaks easily, but if you bundle many chopsticks together, they become much stronger. They have great strength. People in the world often say, unity is strength. This also has its own very important meaning. Therefore, for us as Buddhists in the future, of course, if you especially prefer to practice alone, if you become a Pratyeka Buddha, we also rejoice in that. If you have already realized the non-self of persons completely and attained half of the realization of the non-self of phenomena, once you truly possess some miraculous powers and abilities, and now you find yourself way up high in the blue sky, with fire coming from your upper body and nectar descending from your lower body, then for such miraculous powers we rejoice as well. But before reaching that point, if we have generated the Mahayana bodhicitta, everyone needs to learn to face things and not let a single negative comment from someone else make you feel unable to even have the strength or the courage to eat with others. There really are some people who don't dare to eat meals. They don't dare to face others. Of course, some may have a wide range of psychological disorders. However, we will not be discussing those specific conditions here. But for a true and a very serious practitioner, this should be quite possible. Whether it's someone else speaking to you or you speaking to others, you really shouldn't be overly attached to it. It's the same with other things, like being with others. I feel I should be able to handle it. No matter who I interact with, I don't get troubled. Even with people who have no faith, I can interact with them just fine. It's also fine when interacting with some great monks and virtuous teachers. Some people seem to be just ordinary folks in the world, including some of the workers and farmers here with us. And in the process of interacting with all kinds of people, I think I really don't have any problem with it. In the future, when I'm not giving lectures, I might go spend time among some farmers, growing some wild vegetables myself and just staying like that, and maybe my mindset would be really good. Alternatively, I could go to some factories and help them out with some of their tasks, and I probably would not feel a great deal of pressure. This is because when I observe my own mindset, no matter what kind of people I interact with, maybe on the surface to you all, I might seem pretty bad, like someone like us, but actually deep down inside, I honestly don't really have any real aversion to anyone. Even if others are dissatisfied with me each and every day, it doesn't really matter. It's no big deal. Even in front of the Buddha, there are people who are dissatisfied, let alone us, just a bunch of troubled, smelly bags of skin when we appear in this world. Of course, others will criticize us. That's only natural. So for now, as I see it, I think to myself, from a somewhat arrogant perspective, it's actually not bad. Team spirit absolutely requires cooperation. Let me briefly talk about this here. Whether it's friends and family or masters and servants, in fact, cooperation between people is truly important. For us Buddhists, it's especially important. Most Buddhists are very good individuals, but we have to admit there are a very small number whose temperament and character are really quite strange. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe this person couldn't make it in society, so is that why they became a monk or nun? Was it really only when they had nowhere else to turn, just like what you see in some movies nowadays, that they really started practicing Buddhism? If that's the case, then even in Buddhism they won't succeed in their practice, because no one can get along with them, let alone cooperate with them. They have widespread problems. This is true for Buddhists as well, including monastics. The vast majority, 99%, are very good. We should respect and revere them. In general, I believe it's perfectly fine to praise, admire, and pray for them. But it's also true that there are a very small number of people, a tiny fraction really, whom I honestly can't bring myself to compliment. So, what shall we talk about next? When facing our own relatives and friends, to truly serve them, we must do so in 5 distinct ways. The very first of these is the practice of giving, which means that one should be generous. This generosity applies to whatever wealth you possess, whatever status you hold, and whatever money you have, as well as food, clothing, and other necessities. Whenever you give something to your relatives, you should try your best to meet their needs. After all, you have a karmic connection with them. Some people say, relatives are the most troublesome. I've also met some eminent monks and great masters who said, never give anything to your relatives. They are the most troublesome. They become more and more greedy, and in the end, they are truly insatiable. They will eventually end up being your greatest source of harm. It is best not to get too close to them. Actually, this isn't quite right either. They are your relatives. Mipham Rinpoche said in the treatise on the modes of a ruler, as long as it does not violate the law or the Dharma, one should always do one's best. Do your best within your own capacity, benefit your relatives and family, and fulfill all their wishes. As long as it doesn't go against worldly laws or the rules of the Dharma, within your own ability, do your best for those with whom you have a karmic connection, your relatives and family members. Help them, give to them, and fulfill their needs. Of course, when it says all their wishes here, sometimes fulfilling all their wishes can be difficult, especially if your friends and relatives are very greedy. Then you may not be able to satisfy all their wishes. But however, if you indeed have the necessary capability in this regard, it is not only necessary but also appropriate to provide them with what they need. In the future, if you have even a little bit of means and ability, you should definitely still give some support to your friends and relatives. The second important point is to always remember to speak kindly to everyone. It's always important to remember to say gentle and kind words when speaking to them. Use more gentle language when talking to them, just as it is mentioned in the Buddhist scriptures. Always take joy in benefiting others and protect all minds. We often help our family and friends speak words of love, words that are steady and reassuring. When speaking with them, it is also important to use words of love and genuine gentleness. We should always strive to help everyone around us feel happy and at ease. This is something that is truly very important. So when you are with your relatives, some people are often especially rude to their own relatives, as if they have just entered a whole group of enemies. And this can be true whether it's with their family or their relatives. They always speak in a very blunt way. This isn't very good either. After all, these are people that you are very close with. So for that reason, this is not a good thing either. This is the second point. The third point we are going to cover is about the key benefit. That is to say, if you have the ability, try your best to help them in terms of body, speech, and mind, whether it's work, career, life, or many other aspects. Do your utmost to help them wholeheartedly. Because by helping in this way, it's actually also very good for yourself. Some people, when it comes to their own relatives and friends, used to look down on them when they themselves were struggling. And even after they became wealthy and powerful, they still can't stand them. But actually, it doesn't have to be this way. If we treat them especially well, things will also turn out well in the future. There's a story in the Buddhist scriptures that goes like this. A father had 2 sons. When this father was about to leave the world, he called for his eldest son to come to him, and then he made a very important request, asking him to make absolutely sure that he would always take good care of his younger brother. Then he passed away after he was gone. So when the younger son had grown up a little bit, the eldest son's wife was actually a rather greedy person. She secretly told her husband, "Before your younger brother grows up, it's best to get rid of him. Otherwise, when he grows up in the future, he'll be a threat to our family inheritance. He'll want to split the inheritance." This happens in India too. And nowadays, many young people often talk about inheritance, splitting up the family property. She said, "He will want to split the inheritance." It's best if you deal with him now. At first, the older brother absolutely refused, but later, after his wife kept bringing it up again and again, he eventually had no choice but to listen to her. Sometimes, as it turns out, a wife's influence can be incredibly powerful, and so, in the end, he took his younger brother along with him to a place that was known to be genuinely frightening. In a desolate place that felt very much like a charnel ground, he took him and securely tied him to a tree, and then said to him, "You consistently go against my explicit wishes, and you repeatedly violate the rules that I have established. So today I'm tying you up here. Tomorrow I'll come back to untie you." He thought to himself, "There are many hungry wolves and wild dogs here. This person will definitely be eaten during the night." Then he left, and when night finally fell, all kinds of fierce beasts appeared. Ferocious beasts with their bared fangs came ready to eat him. At that moment, the younger brother was extremely frightened. He wondered, in this world, in the three realms, is there anyone who can save me? He sincerely prayed and called for help. At that moment, the conditions for the Buddha to save him had ripened. Then the Buddha emitted three kinds of light. The first light was one that dispelled darkness. He was in darkness at the time. All the darkness was dispelled. The second light was for untying bonds. It was just like the mantra for untying bonds that we recite. He had originally been tied to a tree with ropes. All of those bonds were released. The third was to make him full. He hadn't eaten all day. At the conclusion of it all, he was unbelievably famished. But after some time, he was finally satiated. After that, he was very happy. After being freed, after gaining his freedom, he followed the light, and the Buddha arrived there to give him refuge. Later, he attained the fruit of sainthood. Then he thought about it for a moment. Actually, the whole sequence of events was indeed related to his older brother and his sister-in-law. There was a certain connection, but he had already attained sainthood. Not only did he not complain or seek revenge, he even wanted to benefit them. Then, relying on his supernatural powers, he arrived at his brother's house. His brother probably felt very embarrassed. Not only had he not died, but he had actually come back. After returning, he said, "You don't need to worry. I won't take your family property. I believe I have now truly attained sainthood. You see, I myself actually came very close to dying, and you are all very, very clear about that. But relying on this karmic connection, I have actually attained the holy fruit of the true Dharma. This also comes from you all. I am very grateful to you. Now that I have obtained these teachings, I can also pass them on to you." After he taught them, they also attained corresponding results. From this, we can also see that sometimes the karmic connections between people are very complex. Sometimes when we read some Buddhist stories from India, they are very fascinating and interesting. It should be said that in many aspects of our lives today, the complexity of human relationships and the human mind, as well as the various situations between people, all kinds of circumstances will manifest. It is often said that we see our own reflections looking back at us in the clear mirrors of history. Through this, we can often clearly see the many different aspects of our present selves in the present day. So when we stop to think about it, what is this phenomenon really? This is a kind of feeling toward our loved ones. When it comes to loved ones, just as it is described in the words of my perfect teacher, if in the first half of our lives someone is a loved one, in the next life they might become a foe or an enemy. If in the first half of life someone is my enemy, then in the next life the relationship might actually be very good. The relationships between people are impermanent, especially if we are able to help our loved ones and offer them the support they need. It is still necessary to do so. Of course, sometimes when you are trying to help out, it might be a little bit inappropriate or excessive, including, for example, the property of the 3 jewels. It's also true that in this day and age, when considering people involved in corruption or embezzlement, the majority are found to be significantly influenced by their own wives and the people in their immediate social circle. These people constantly encourage and increase their greed, and in the end they go astray. This phenomenon does exist. Such situations are the result of being overly helpful, but there are also some truly upright leaders and some genuinely pure practitioners who seem to be completely unconcerned with the world around them. As for this kind of approach, actually, it's hard to say whether it's reasonable or not. Sometimes when we take a closer look at some of the stories about Shakyamuni Buddha, we find that this is indeed the case. The Buddha had already attained the state of perfect and complete enlightenment, but the Buddha still cared deeply for his former family members, including his Shakya clan. He truly showed great concern for them as well. In fact, His Holiness the Dharma King also once said that being like the Buddha is indeed the highest state, but in appearance he showed great compassion toward his own relatives. And His Holiness the Dharma King himself also appeared to be very caring toward his younger sister Ali Meju, as well as, it should be noted, toward the Venerable Dakini Munso. This is something that most people might find hard to imagine, but he was exceptionally good to them, especially to some of those close to His Holiness, including his nieces and nephews, for example. He was especially attentive and caring toward them as well. As practitioners, if we look at it from this particular perspective, if we ourselves are completely indifferent to the people and events around us, then perhaps our level of realization is indeed a bit too high. Maybe even too high, so high that we can't pay attention to others. Whether this is ultimately a good thing or not is actually quite difficult to determine. You might also know some of the well-known stories between the Buddha and King Viruddhaka, many of which have been told and retold before. But I would like to talk about this matter here as well. After the Buddha attained enlightenment, he was actually especially concerned about the future of his Shakya clan. The situation of King Viruddhaka exterminating the Shakya clan was also indeed very complicated. There were certain causes and conditions from past lives, and in addition, there were also certain specific causes and conditions that were present in this life. For now, let's not talk about the causes and conditions from past lives, as numerous other stories have already explained them in detail. So what about this life? When King Viruddhaka was still very young, his actual father, you see, should have been King Prasenajit, that particular king, during a period of time when his overall political power wasn't really all that strong. A certain king went to the Shakya clan to propose marriage. At that time, the Shakya clan was known for being a particularly powerful and proud clan, so they looked down on the king and his proposal. In the end, in an effort to avoid conflict while still upholding their noble pride, they presented a maidservant who was in the service of a Shakya noble named Mahanama, pretended that his maid was also from the Shakya clan, and then told him, "She is indeed a princess from our very own royal palace." At first he really believed this was the case, but later found out it wasn't true. But by then she was already pregnant with King Viruddhaka, so there was nothing that could be done. After King Viruddhaka was born, when he had grown just a little older, his father decided to send him to the Shakya clan so he could begin his formal studies. Unfortunately, at that time, the other princes of the Shakya clan really looked down on him in particular, and often insulted and bullied him. They would say, "He is simply the son of a maid." Later, King Viruddhaka became very unhappy after being bullied by them. He said, "When my country becomes strong in the future, I will definitely mobilize the army and wipe out the Shakya clan." Because he had this karmic connection from his previous life, it was very easy for such causes and conditions to come together in this life. Later, after the Buddha attained enlightenment, many people around him reminded him at that time, "King Viruddhaka, didn't you make a vow before? Now regarding the Shakya clan, aren't you going to send your army?" As a direct result of this, he began to send out his troops. When he was preparing to massacre the Shakya clan, the Buddha himself deliberately sat under a withered tree on the very path they were required to pass through, patiently sitting there and enduring the intense, scorching heat of India at that time. Despite his aggressive intentions, King Viruddhaka still held a notable degree of respect for the Buddha. And so, when the king and his army eventually arrived at that spot, the first thing King Viruddhaka did was to ask the Buddha. A person passing by asked the Buddha, "Venerable sir, there are so many lush and shady trees all around. Why do you choose to sit under this completely withered tree?" The Buddha replied with profound meaning, "The shade provided by one's own kin is always far superior to any shelter offered by outsiders." He said that the protective shade provided by one's own kin greatly surpasses that of others. With these words, he was hinting that he was a relative of the renowned Shakya clan. He then went on to say, "Today I am here to demonstrate this very thing." Upon hearing this, at that moment, King Viruddhaka fully understood the implication, that the Buddha really intended for him not to go. Therefore, in the end, he withdrew all of his troops completely. Then, after some time, many people again urged him, asking why he still hadn't gone. This time he set out on his journey once again, but his destination was a completely different place, and when he finally led his army there, once again the Buddha relied on his supernatural powers and appeared on their only route. Just as before, he sat in meditation under a withered tree. When King Virudaka asked the same question again, in response, the Buddha calmly and patiently gave the very same profound answer. The shade of kin is superior to that of outsiders. At that time, King Virudaka, who still held a great deal of respect for the Buddha, therefore felt that it was inappropriate to proceed with his plans, and so he commanded his forces to withdraw once more. It seemed to be the third time. At that time, the Buddha did not come out in order to put a stop to their actions. It should have been Maudgalyayana who came then. Maudgalyayana had great supernatural powers, but Buddha warned him the outcome would not be ideal. But there was nothing to be done. You see, even I couldn't stop them. Maudgalyayana, though the most powerful, you can do nothing. Later, Maudgalyayana took the people of the Shakya clan. He first put them into his alms bowl, and for their protection he also placed them in the heavenly realm. But no matter what he did to try and save them in the end, there was nothing more that could be done. Later, after these events, only Mahanama remained. This is mentioned in the Indian biography of the Buddha. Perhaps that's also how it happened historically. He was with 5 ascetics. Later, when the Shakya clan truly had no king left, the Buddha also permitted him to return to lay life and become king. It just so happened that when King Virudaka arrived, he was in fact serving as king there. He came out, and this is what he said. "Pardon me, regarding that pond over there, I was hoping to get your permission to see if it would be all right for me to jump in before I come out. Could you please allow at least some of the Shakya people to escape?" At that very moment, King Virudaka thought to himself, he absolutely cannot stay in the water for a much longer period of time. He will surely come out very soon, and for this very reason he agreed to it. Upon reaching this agreement, King Mahanama immediately proceeded to enter the pond. It is said that once he was inside, he deliberately tied his hair to an object beneath the water's surface. As a direct consequence of this action, he never came out of the pond. By that time, many of the Shakya people had already escaped. Upon seeing this, King Virudaka realized that the Shakyan king had sacrificed himself for his people within the city. This noble act created an opportunity, allowing some of the Shakyan people to escape amidst the chaos. It's also noted that among the group present at that time were 500 beautiful women from the royal court. King Virudaka wanted to take them to the palace to live with him. However, when those women steadfastly refused to live with him, he then had all of their hands and feet brutally cut off. After this event, the Buddha also compassionately taught them the Dharma through various other skillful means. After attaining the purity of the Dharma eye, they were reborn in the heavenly realms, and so the episode concluded as nothing more could be done. At that time, the Shakya clan was annihilated in this way. What can we see from this particular example? Regarding our esteemed teacher Shakyamuni Buddha, we can observe that his attitude was consistent, whether it was toward his own father King Shuddhodana, his only son Rahula, or the other members of his royal family, the Shakya clan. He genuinely loved and showed profound compassion for them in an extraordinary way, you could say. And even more importantly, especially at that critical time when the Shakya clan was facing annihilation, the Buddha himself personally came to this place, constantly trying to find ways to help. But indeed, karma is truly inconceivable. Sometimes we might think this way. When we try our very best to help and support our family or friends, we give it our all. But sometimes, just like the Buddha, there is nothing we can do. Even Maudgalyayana couldn't do anything either. So when karma truly manifests, we might also be powerless. With some patients or when certain karmic results appear, no one can do anything about it. I often think to myself, when some irreversible things happen, I think this must be the manifestation of karma from a previous life. And when karma from a previous life manifests, for example, if you get sick, even taking medicine won't help. Or when certain things happen, no matter what kind of resistance you try, it's useless. Back in 2017, a Dharma friend's house was demolished. After it was torn down, he said he tried all kinds of ways to save it, but it must have been karma from a previous life, so there was nothing he could do. At the most critical moment, despite his best efforts, his house unfortunately still couldn't be saved. Originally, when the house was constructed, the cement and steel he chose to use were all exceptionally solid materials, but in the end, despite its strong foundation, it was completely destroyed, turning into nothing but ruins. Therefore, as a result of this ordeal, he developed a very strong sense of cause and effect. This particular feeling is not because his master told him. After his own house was completely demolished, He eventually gained a much more definitive and profound understanding of causality. For him, this particular dilapidated house served as a truly significant and unmistakable sign. So sometimes we also have this kind of attitude toward the karma. I won't talk about it in too much detail. Ultimately, this is really just about interest. So with that in mind, we should treat all our relatives equally. Relatives also benefit, and so do we ourselves. For instance, whether we are talking about some so-called wealth in this day and age, or even some kind of joint work, we also absolutely let them join in. If we can all practice together, it is also beneficial for them. For instance, if I happen to have a certain project or something else of that nature, and I make use of completely legal means to let them participate as well, so then they also stand to benefit at the very same time. You could certainly put it that way. I've seen in some of the other handouts, for example, that there are also a number of different ways of explaining this. However, we can understand this principle in a more straightforward way. It's about the practice of mutually helping each other and providing some convenience. Then the fifth important point is the commitment not to deceive. This is particularly vital when it comes to our relatives and friends, as in these close relationships, we absolutely must not cheat or deceive one another. Deception itself is, without a doubt, the dirtiest and most despicable thing that can be found deep within people's hearts, especially towards those people who trust us deeply and have great confidence in us, particularly our relatives and close friends. It is very important that we do our best to be honest with them. We should never deceive them, regardless of whether the matter is about money or social status. If you often deceive those around you, they will undoubtedly be very disappointed as well. As a person, that is something I can certainly understand. One needs to uphold these 5 principles towards their relatives and friends. The Buddha told Shansheng, if you possess these 5 qualities and treat your relatives with closeness and respect, that is very good. Naturally, it should be understood that our other relatives and friends in their relationship with us are also expected to uphold these same 5 guiding principles. In the same way, relatives also have 5 specific duties they should perform for us. What are these 5? It's actually the reverse. In fact, this is a situation that is truly mutually beneficial. For example, I should treat my relatives in this way, and in return, as my relatives, they can also apply those same 5 principles to me as well. Or, as we will discuss in the following 5 points, they can help me in these ways. So, between relatives and friends, there should be a total of 10 principles shared mutually. Understanding it in this particular way should be perfectly fine. So, the first and most important point to remember is to protect against any form of carelessness. When we talked about relatives and friends earlier, the first 4 points were essentially the same. First, it is important to protect them and do not let your relatives and friends become overly indulgent. For example, killing, stealing, drinking alcohol, and so on. If they often do many things that are not in accordance with the law or proper conduct, then as a relative or friend, you shouldn't just ignore it or even gloat about it on the side, like, look at our relative, see what they're doing now, as if you are even happier about it. That's not reasonable. After all, they are your relatives and friends, your children, your siblings. When they engage in many improper behaviors, whether or not they listen is their own business, but you should try to persuade them not to be so reckless. It's meaningless for this life and meaningless for the next. You shouldn't just ignore it. You should absolutely do everything within your power to protect them and make certain not to let them be so excessively reckless or overly indulgent. Otherwise, it will be bad for the family in the future and bad for the whole family lineage as well. So that's one aspect. That's the first point. Now, the second point, what else should you protect against? The loss of wealth due to recklessness. Because some people might spend their money quite carelessly, some individuals live overly extravagant lives and also do many things that are simply not proper. As we have mentioned, there are 6 specific kinds of things discussed earlier that can definitely lead to the unfortunate loss of wealth. As friends or family, in order to fully protect their hard-earned money, in order to safeguard their property, you should do everything you possibly can to offer them your support. Of course, in the modern world we live in today, sometimes it seems there's nothing we can do to help. Everyone wants to gain something, whether it's through financial management or stocks. Nowadays, when people get involved, they often talk about these things. Many people are also especially heartbroken, including these past few days, and as we have seen, the global stock markets have been continuously falling. Suddenly, many people who were originally quite well off, in the blink of an eye, he became completely penniless. Everything was gone. Everyone, it seems, has already developed a particularly deep feeling about the concept of impermanence. Oh, yesterday I had so many tens of thousands. But in the present day, sadly, all of that has vanished, Lama Chin. Back in those times, people held a much greater and more profound faith in their teacher. Sometimes when you look at people in the world, yesterday a Dharma friend said something. When something happens to others, we just say, don't be attached. But when it happens to ourselves, we can't take it. That's really how it is now. If someone else is suffering, crying, we say, it's okay, don't worry, don't worry. All phenomena are empty in nature. This is a blessing from your teacher. It's also an opportunity. However, when you're personally in that situation, it's very possible your mind goes blank and you can't think at all. Even so, the advice we've shared can still be incredibly helpful, especially for yourself. Sometimes when we look at people in the world, indeed, all of their possessions are just sitting there, completely untouched, and then all of a sudden, when they wake up in the morning, it is all completely gone. At that moment, that kind of feeling is genuinely and truly unimaginable. Of course, when it comes to protecting these things, frankly, we don't really know how to properly protect them, and it's even possible that there is simply no foolproof way to do so. But sometimes, when you're looking at the widespread turmoil happening in the world and witnessing all of these incredibly rapid changes, when we encounter situations like the loss of personal wealth, this experience is a clear example of what Buddhism refers to as impermanence. This is a concept that we should be able to feel quite deeply, don't you think? This is about protecting wealth. That's the second point. The third principle is providing protection from fear. If a person, for whatever reason, feels especially insecure deep down at heart, constantly anxious about gains and losses, or is often in a state of fear, so much so that they don't even dare to go out at night. And even during the day, they are frequently disturbed, sometimes by non-human entities, sometimes by other people, and sometimes by all sorts of other things like earth, water, fire, wind, wild beasts, kings, and so on. Various things, actually. This kind of situation isn't very good. Many of our fellow practitioners, whether they're your friends or fellow cultivators, protection from fear is very important. In our daily lives, we do indeed encounter some things that can be quite frightening, but it is important that we shouldn't be afraid. Some of our fellow practitioners are especially timid for reasons unknown. It seems like whenever they encounter this or that, whether we are considering non-human beings or even the powerful asuras, they are all living in a state of constant fear. But in reality, there is nothing to be afraid of. In the end, you might genuinely find yourself facing death, for instance, in a catastrophic event like a plane crash. In that specific kind of situation, of course, no one can handle it. Just a couple of days ago, there was a plane in Russia. It crashed right after takeoff. The sounds of fear from everyone on board. I can understand that too. But if you haven't encountered something like that in daily life, then all in all, that's pretty good. And there really shouldn't be anything to worry about. Now, if you happen to see someone wearing some unusual clothes, when you run into them on the street, you get really scared and don't dare to speak. You weren't supposed to be silent, but suddenly you become silent. That kind of reaction might not be necessary. Everyone really should. Because in this world we live in, if someone commits extremely serious bad deeds, they might be afraid of falling into hell. If you commit very serious criminal offenses, such as murder or theft, for example, you really will be sentenced for those kinds of things. So you might be afraid in those cases. Putting that aside, for the vast majority of us, regardless of the country you happen to live in, you will generally understand the laws of that particular country. If you understand the country's laws and haven't broken them, then if something happens to you for no apparent reason at all, it can only be due to your own karma manifesting. Otherwise, it can't happen. So in daily life, there's no need for everyone to be fearful. In the end, it seems like even when friends come to visit, people are scared. When the thought arises in your mind that it's like a terrifying demon is coming for you, you must understand this really isn't good at all. So because of this, in this very life, most of us haven't experienced any truly major disasters, but after all, we've still encountered many things. We should keep our minds very calm. So when nothing is happening, some people still tend to worry unnecessarily, like the proverbial man who fears the sky will fall. Or they feel especially terrified. This really isn't necessary. As Dharma friends, we should also have the mindset of protecting each other. This is very, very important. Some people might be especially afraid of something else entirely, like the idea of falling into hell themselves, but in actual fact, this fear is also quite unnecessary. There is a very good example that can be found in the Mahaprajaparamita Shastra. Didn't I just happen to mention the name Mahanama earlier? Well, once this same King Mahanama went to go and see the Buddha. He said, "I might have no hope left." He was especially afraid, and the Buddha asked, "Why?" He replied, "Whether I'm riding a horse or seeing an elephant, I immediately feel a sense of fear. At those times, I lose my mind of reciting the Buddha's name. So, at the moment of my death, it is very possible that I might lose my faculty of right mindfulness, and as a result, I am afraid I will fall into a bad realm." Later, the Buddha explained to him, for example, let's say there is a certain tree. If, as it continues to grow, it consistently leans toward the east, then when that tree is finally cut down at its trunk, its branches and leaves will fall in the direction of the east. In the same way, if you are a good person and you wholeheartedly practice virtuous deeds, so then, whenever you ultimately die, even if you are unable to recall the Buddha, you will not fall, you will not descend into a bad realm. I have to say, this particular passage truly resonates with me. Some people here truly are like this. When visualizing the Buddha, we often cannot see the deity clearly, and there are many high standards that we simply cannot meet. But after all, every day we do our best to practice virtuous deeds. We have always been making efforts in this regard. So if I were to die at any time, I wouldn't, for no reason at all. Since I haven't committed such great evils, how could I possibly fall into a bad realm? There is still a sense of comfort, a sense of security. So if each and every one of us were to think this way, it should be said that except for a very few people, most of us haven't committed much evil. For the majority, when it comes to practicing virtuous deeds, you don't need to live in fear all the time. The Buddha always said that do not fear, do not be afraid. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. He said this, he told Mahanama, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. So for us as well, if we have some worries about the next life, we also shouldn't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And if we feel a bit scared in this life, we often say, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. And so some Dharma friends will often try to comfort these people who are timid, as some of them genuinely are especially timid. But really, there's nothing to be afraid of. Whether we're speaking or doing something, we should face it normally. There's really nothing to it. What's the big deal? You know, we really should be a little bit braver. Otherwise, if we find ourselves being too fragile and delicate in this world, in the end, we might not even dare to walk anymore. There are indeed cases like this, so as practitioners, we should look to the examples of the great masters and eminent monks of the past. Not long ago, we just talked about the story of the master Faxian. When he was in his 60s or 70s, he wanted to go abroad. At that time, whether it was the snowy mountains on the road, ferocious beasts, deserts, or any kind of terror, he wasn't afraid at all and just went straight ahead. But as for us now when we study Buddhism and in many of our temples nowadays, we really don't need to be so hard on some people. And this is because they're oftentimes especially timid and quite fragile, especially for these reasons. They've already lost many opportunities to study Buddhism. Indeed, I've mentioned before, our guru, the Venerable Jigme Phuntsok Rinpoche, was very brave, an extremely courageous person. Otherwise, even the temples we have today might not exist. Including all of us, we have already been deeply influenced by our respected guru, so when it comes to ordinary and minor matters, we will not be afraid or easily give up. We should always face everything in life with a truly firm determination and continue to move forward courageously. This is incredibly important. Don't be afraid. You don't have to be afraid. There is no reason to be afraid. So what is this? This is the third point. Now, the fourth important point is admonishing in private. As family members, it is generally inappropriate for us to scold someone in public. When certain specific things actually happen, it is important that we should admonish them privately and always in secret. The fifth point is to frequently praise each other, as this is a key element in building positive relationships. You should make it a habit to often praise and encourage your family and friends, because acknowledging their efforts can greatly strengthen your connection. Because nowadays people really like to talk about others' merits. Even if someone isn't very good looking, people will say, "Wow, you look so beautiful." And that person will be very happy. If someone isn't very brave, you say, "Wow, you're amazing." "Oh, seriously? Are you a Leo?" "I'm just asking because you are so incredibly impressive." People still really like this kind of thing. So among family and friends, but I'm not very good at it myself, is being a Leo a symbol of bravery, right? I guess so. Well, that's acceptable. We should speak like this. Especially with family and friends, it can feel like sometimes everyone, now we have family gatherings, and sometimes in Tibetan areas, it seems. In Tibetan areas, people today still place a great deal of importance on the bonds of family and relatives. Some have a tribal mindset or a strong sense of kinship. For example, if a relative gets sick, it is a deeply ingrained tradition that all their relatives will come to visit. If someone tries to bully them, the entire community will come together to help. So generally, in Tibetan areas, in the past, when Sera Khandro came here from Lhasa, She was bullied a lot. She even mentioned in her autobiography, because I came from Lhasa and had no relatives here, there were still some people who bullied me. So generally speaking, whether it's some tribes or some families, everyone is still, there is an old saying that goes, in times of happiness, everyone should be there together as well. Whether it's a banquet or a wedding, at those times friends and relatives gather together. In times of hardship, everyone should be there. For example, when someone is sick or being bullied, people are expected to show up and offer their support. I believe this might be similar in many other places around the world as well. But from what I have personally seen, some Western families may not necessarily be quite like this. At most, the support is often just between the children and their parents, and then between the parents and their own parents. In some places, the relationships are still rather distant. Nowadays, many people in cities are also more deeply influenced by this Western way of doing things. It's also a bit unique, you could say. Actually, when it comes to these specific kinds of relatives and friends, it's challenging to definitively state which aspect is superior, largely because of the deeply personal and intricate feelings that exist between relatives and friends. These emotional bonds, built over time through shared experiences, are not easily quantified or compared, making a clear decision very difficult to reach. These rituals among friends and family, is it better for them to be strong or not so strong? Maybe that's something everyone needs to observe for themselves. But speaking of Tibet, for now, you can be certain that its traditions will not disappear, because deep within their hearts, these cherished traditions are fundamentally and deeply rooted. Even now, with advanced technology, they have some WeChat groups where relatives and friends often get together to chat and stay in touch. In our daily lives, this kind of thing happens quite frequently. It is very important for people to learn to praise each other and to maintain open and honest communication. For this reason, the Buddha told the young man Shansheng, if you can truly learn to respect your relatives and family members in this specific way, then that place will definitely be peaceful and free from fear and worry. This is specifically about the aspect of our relationships with relatives and friends. So for our next topic, what exactly are we going to be discussing? In this video, we are going to have a discussion about masters and their dependents. Here, the term servant might not sound very pleasant. It refers to the relationship between master and servant, or master and dependents, as a master would be towards every single one of his attendants, towards his dependents and subordinates. There are also 5 ways to instruct them. So what are these 5 ways? The first principle is to assign tasks according to individual abilities. This means a leader should first understand the unique strengths and skills of each team member. The goal is to then match the right person to the right task, ensuring responsibilities are handled by those best equipped to perform them well. So, based on their different individual abilities and unique skill sets, you would arrange the tasks they are to do accordingly. For example, if someone is particularly skilled at being a gatekeeper, you would then assign them to that role. Then assign them to be the gatekeeper. If someone has demonstrated that they are well suited for clerical work, for instance, then it is highly beneficial to let them perform that clerical work. Similarly, they should be allowed to take on some management tasks, but only if they genuinely possess the right qualities and skills required for that area. Then use them in that capacity. Therefore, it is important that you provide them with thorough training in advance in a variety of different aspects. As a master towards your subordinates, you should assign tasks based on their different abilities, their particular strengths and their unique characteristics, and then arrange truly useful work for them in those areas. The selection and use of talent is very important. A wise person will place someone exactly in a useful position, and one that aligns perfectly with their expertise. Consequently, putting such a person in such a position is exceptionally suitable. That's the first point. Now, the second point, as a responsible master, you should always ensure that all of your subordinates have enough food to eat, beverages to drink, and clothing to wear. These basic necessities should always be provided for them. You can't let your people go without food or clothing. Living in extreme poverty and then expect them to do a lot of work is also something that won't succeed. This is about the connection between food and the realities of daily life. If people have the financial means to eat a little bit better, they will take the opportunity to do so. Of course, sometimes this can lead to being overly extravagant or unnecessarily wasteful. It's also quite unnecessary. It should be handled under the principles of frugality and appropriateness so that every single person can have good, nourishing meals. This, in essence, concludes the second point. Now, regarding the third point, it is essential to grant them fair wages as compensation for their labor. And this applies whether the compensation is in the form of monetary wages or other assets that they receive. The wages that are owed to him should be paid out promptly. This point is incredibly important to understand, because if he can't even get the wages he has rightfully earned, then there is nothing he can do to support himself. Nowadays, it's a well-known fact that a certain number of companies have bosses who are known for being particularly stingy and are reluctant to pay their employees' wages. In the end, the employees just keep waiting and waiting, and eventually they all leave and no one is left. At that particular point in time, the boss is also feeling quite miserable. So as a result, their compensation and their financial benefits should be handled appropriately and in a timely manner. If you treat him well, this is actually very important. I also talked about this some time ago. For us Buddhists, among us, those who are capable should try their best to treat their subordinates well, and also those who work for you, by providing them with jobs and employment opportunities. Right now, employment is a major issue worldwide. Whenever I go to any place, I ask, how is your employment situation? Originally, as a monk, I wouldn't be concerned about their employment or unemployment. But sometimes indeed, in many places, especially where the unemployment rate is particularly high, I feel very sorry for them. Truly, from the bottom of my heart, I feel this way. When I go to places with higher employment rates, I personally also feel very happy about it. So for us Buddhists, if you are blessed and capable, at the very least, you should absolutely help some people to survive. And beyond that, providing good and stable jobs is also incredibly necessary. This in itself is also a great merit. Now, the fourth point is to give them, for example, when someone is sick and therefore unable to work, it's important to provide them with a social safety net, a concept very similar to what we now call the 5 insurances and 1 fund, which provides basic financial security. This includes social benefits such as pension insurance, medical insurance, unemployment insurance, the Housing Provident Fund, and other similar programs. Nowadays, many people often ask, do we have the 5 insurances and 1 fund? But at the beginning, some companies simply can't manage it. Maybe some listed companies can handle these aspects, but some can only solve it temporarily. In the end, all your insurances, eventually you might not be able to keep them. This kind of situation does happen. Of course, as a responsible employer, you should genuinely care for the well-being of your employees, whether it concerns their health, illnesses, or medical needs, and it's crucial to pay attention to all of these aspects. Then, the 5th point is to allow them proper rest. You should provide them with appropriate times to rest, as it's crucial for their well-being and long-term productivity. For example, you can't have a 9-9-6 schedule, which means working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, and having to work on Saturdays as well. If that is indeed the case, then many people will very probably end up feeling quite exhausted. In the West, it seems that most people have 2 days off each week, and their schedules are more regular. Especially in places like Europe, many people save up all their vacation days together and then take about 3 months off in a year. They'll go to the seaside with their whole family to have fun. They don't really save money, unlike in some places here where people work desperately to earn money. And when they die, all their money is still in the bank. The money ends up in the bank and the person ends up in the funeral home. It's not like that for them. Most of them basically don't save any significant amount of money. They generally work for about 7 or 8 months out of the entire year, and when it's time for them to rest, they will drive their own cars to the seaside. Once they've spent all their money, they come back and continue working. That's actually a pretty good way to live too. No matter what, sometimes you really do need to take a break. Rest is very important as well. Some of our fellow practitioners stay up all night all the time. Staying up late can be good too. That includes those of us who work on compiling lecture notes. Right now, some of our dedicated volunteers here have been working on the lecture notes nonstop. We're especially grateful to them for that. This really provides a great convenience for everyone. But if you keep staying up late like this for a long time, it really does make us genuinely concerned about your health and well-being. Maybe you could consider taking a slightly longer break in between. Otherwise, pulling an all-nighter once or twice is perfectly fine, but it's extremely hard to fully recover from it. So, generally speaking, it's recommended to take appropriate breaks from time to time. Of course, if you find yourself resting for far too long, like taking a break today and then another one the very next day, then when you get to work, you look gloomy and don't want to do anything. You want to earn a significant amount of money, but do a minimal amount of work. That kind of attitude definitely isn't good. Regardless of what you decide to do, you still need to put in the effort. I think making an effort is very important. But even more important, Sometimes what we really need in our lives is precisely this kind of deep relaxation. Therefore, the topic being discussed here is actually quite beneficial and very good. Now, if this were a formal set of requirements or a detailed manual for managing a business, it would be very important. When a superior has certain expectations of their subordinates, on the surface it seems like it's just about discipline for them. But in reality, the superior themselves also wants absolutely everything they are responsible for to be accomplished very successfully. And that is also a very good thing. The Buddha then explained, Shansheng, if you are able to teach your servants and your dependents in accordance with these 5 important things, then it is guaranteed that everything you set out to do will most definitely be accomplished. Of course, as the master, we must never harbor any feelings of contempt just because he is my subordinate. That doesn't necessarily mean that even though for the time being you are his master, it is very much possible that in the later stages of your life, you could potentially become his servant, and that outcome is entirely possible. Or in the next life, who knows what you might become? It's hard to say. In the essential collection of sutras, it says, reflecting on the past and present, wealth and status are never permanent. From ancient times to the present, both in China and abroad, you see sometimes wealth and poverty in reality are not always the same as they might appear to be. Life and death pass in an instant. Nobility and lowliness are like dust. Our birth and death happen in the blink of an eye. Both arising and ceasing occur in an instant. Today you may be wealthy and noble, but tomorrow you could become poor. So indeed, status and rank are just like dust. There is nothing fixed about them. They are all just like dust. There is nothing reliable about them. Therefore, we ourselves should not be arrogant. Thinking, oh, he will always be my servant, is actually not entirely right either. We should always strive to treat other people equally in this way. So with that in mind, next. Furthermore, there are also 5 important duties that family members and servants are expected to perform in their service to their master. So what exactly are these 5 duties? The first of these duties is the responsibility of getting up early, which is crucial for ensuring punctuality and arriving on time for work. Actually, the relationship between a teacher and a disciple can also be thought of in this way. As disciples, we should get up early. When His Holiness used to travel to many places, I also had the opportunity to go out. But generally speaking, we would only be allowed to rest after His Holiness himself had completely finished resting. Early in the morning, well before he had even woken up, we always had to get ourselves up and get ready for the day, preparing ourselves for what was ahead. Sometimes, thinking back now, we really should have gotten up early and gone to bed late. This is also without a doubt a very effective form of training. Some people say that the more you sleep, the healthier you become, but that's not necessarily true. So, for those of us who are Dharma friends, and this applies whether you have a master or not, it is truly for the best that we do not sleep for too long. This advice is particularly relevant at this time because it is currently the season of spring. It's even more important to get up earlier and recite texts. Every morning I see some places, including some Dharma friends across the mountain reciting texts, and some Dharma friends chanting scriptures on their own. At such times, hearing these sounds is very comforting. Now it's not too cold either at times like this. I sincerely hope that the Dharma friends who are here, who are studying, contemplating and practicing, should really try their very best to see if there is a way not to sleep too deeply either. I've heard that some people are such deep sleepers that they can't even be woken up by 1 or 2 alarm clocks placed directly on their pillow. They still manage to sleep very soundly through the noise, and I suppose that must be the case for some individuals. This situation is, of course, rather unusual. Getting up early is still very important, because in some places, perhaps some of the people who are working in these companies, or some students in the world, some especially like to dream and wander in their dreams. This is also quite nice. But it's best to get up early and go to bed late in order to study, contemplate, and practice. That's the first point. Secondly, when doing anything, you should consider things thoroughly, carefully, and meticulously. You must carry out the task earnestly and properly. Either you don't accept it, or if you do accept it, you must see it through. You must see it through from beginning to end, doing everything sincerely. Otherwise, some people take on a task, and after taking it on, they themselves, it's like we Tibetans say, the bone in front of an old dog. They can't chew it themselves, but they're also unwilling to give it to others. In this way, a lot of things get delayed. So when doing something, it is important that you are very earnest and meticulous. You should do it thoroughly, with great care, and with genuine dedication. If you do it in this way, everything will be accomplished perfectly, and other people will certainly see that. Oh, he is really meticulous and dedicated in his work. Actually, the people around us can all see it clearly. They'll say, oh, that person, when it comes to work, don't worry, there's no problem. Oh, that person, when doing works, they talk a good game at the beginning, but you can be sure they won't do it. Just watch. They definitely won't follow through. We often say things like this. So when undertaking any task, you must be thorough and rigorous. You absolutely must take things quite seriously. Let's make sure we bring this important matter to a complete and absolutely perfect conclusion. It's very good. And as for the third point, if the owner hasn't given it to you, don't just take it without permission. Because if you're around the owner, there will definitely be many opportunities. But if he hasn't given it to you, when you take something here today and something else there tomorrow, eventually the owner will notice. It will make things very awkward between you. This isn't good, especially in front of the owner. Now, the fourth point, when working, there should be a sense of order and sequence. Consider the owner's perspective and your own perspective. Do the meaningful and important things first. Then tackle the more difficult ones later, or handle certain tasks afterwards. When we do things, it is important that we have a clear plan, a logical sequence, and proper arrangements. It's not about doing something over here and then something else over there at random, because if, in the end, nothing of substance gets accomplished, then that approach is unreasonable. So it is important to remember that when doing things, there must always be a proper sense of order. Now, let's proceed to the fifth key point, which is about praising the name of your master. This praise should be given openly in front of others, whether it's in the presence of your master, your colleagues, or other individuals. Whenever you can, try to speak very highly of them. You shouldn't, upon hearing about others, immediately say, wow, our person, our leader is terrible. Nowadays, generally speaking, we often see some people frequently criticize their own leaders. This actually shows that they themselves are lacking, because when your leader directly manages you, you can't accept it. So as a result, and generally speaking, let's take an example. Within your department, if it happens that there are some not so good things or some challenges happening in your specific group, try not to publicize them in front of others. Back when our school was first established, when I held meetings with the teachers, the first thing I said was, in our school, generally speaking, nothing particularly disgraceful would happen. But even if something did happen, I hoped that we would not air our dirty laundry in public. These are our internal matters. So sometimes it's the same for practitioners as well. This also applies to your class or whatever group you are in. If you only talk about faults, that's especially bad. From a worldly perspective, if there is genuine respect and if things are generally going well in this way, for example, if a disciple demonstrates profound respect and praise for their teacher, and when others witness this, they will come to believe that this person must have received the teacher's blessings and attainments. But if you keep saying our teacher is not good, people are always complaining, saying things like our king is not good, our leader is not good, or this and that of ours is not good. On one hand, others might think maybe their master really isn't good, but on the other hand, others might think that you yourself may have some issues. So if we are to speak in more general terms, people who often speak ill of others definitely have quite a few shortcomings themselves, more or less. What kind of shortcomings? First, they are not good at communication themselves. If someone is always pointing out others' faults, they are definitely not good at communicating. The second thing is, in the eyes of others, they are not seen in a good light either. Because if I can't stand them, they definitely can't stand me either. In this way, so in the eyes of others, this is not a good person. And then thirdly, their mindset is also not very good. If their mindset were compassionate, like a bodhisattva, and they maintained a pure mind, they wouldn't possibly speak ill of others in any situation. For some people, it's a matter of personality differences. As soon as they open their mouths, they point out others' faults and praise themselves, saying things like, oh, I'm so great and remarkable. Whenever they mention others, they start pointing fingers. And then when it comes to talking about themselves, they go on about how great they are. With this kind of attitude, others might not necessarily agree with you. Maybe others are like this. However, it's also quite possible that you yourself have this tendency. In this context, it is said that the best approach is to offer praise to your own teacher or master, and this is considered to be a very positive and beneficial action. In the process of working together, we should have a sense of teamwork ourselves. For example, if you study Tibetan Buddhism, you should do your best to promote the positive aspects of Tibetan Buddhism. If there are shortcomings, it's not that you can't mention them, but you need to understand. And as for the great masters and the history of Tibetan Buddhism, if you have truly gained achievements and benefits from it yourself, then, in one way or another, everyone is certainly aware of this. We would often hear our most precious guru give praise to his own root guru and his lineage masters. Among his teachers, there was not a single one he spoke ill of. He often praised their virtues, especially when he spoke about Toga Rinpoche. He was especially reverent. And for us, the people listening below, the elder, his guru, truly had already received the mind-to-mind transmission and blessings. We hope to be like the guru to receive the mind-to-mind transmission and blessings. Naturally, this kind of feeling arises in our hearts indirectly. If our guru were to criticize his own guru all day long, we might also develop this kind of habit to some extent, and would also speak in such a way. So, however we treat our master, in fact, in the future, if you have the opportunity and have subordinates, your subordinates will treat you the same way. If you often talk about your master's faults, then those below you will also talk about your faults. So, in this respect, there is also a kind of law of cause and effect. Everyone should also pay close attention to this. We are talking about the nature of the relationship between companions, as well as the dynamic that exists between a master and their servant. If we treat each other in this way, didn't we mention above that there are 10 kinds of principles? If we treat and serve each other in this way, and so then both sides will be at peace and feel secure. There will be absolutely no more worries or fears, and a true sense of happiness will be attained. All right, then we will stop right here for today.
Sonam dei tamse thogaya tonne de jana pase kirgana jirano chupai chupun solen dra dra
ma bandran gara badna sodargye ma bandran gara badna sodargye Bandara Badma Sodargye